This is part 2 of our section on Islam. Today we're going to take a look at the two sects of Islam, the Sunnis and the Shiites. We'll shed a little bit of light on their history. We'll also talk about the Sufis, which are the Muslim mystics, of whom there are both Sunni Sufis and Shiite Sufis. And then we're going to take a little look at Islamic history up to about the 20th century. Almost up to the 20th century. We'll look at the growth of the Umayyad and Abbasid empires and the influence of Islamic intellectualism on the world and on Western Europe in particular. So we've looked at the life of the Prophet, and we've taken a look at up to the point in which he's died. So the Quran was written after his death, technically. And it was just after his death that this sectarianism between the Sunnis and the Shiites first happened. It happened within a year of the Prophet's death. Right away, there were disagreements over authority. Within 10 years, they had set up the first caliphate. We'll talk about what caliphates are. It's basically a major authority figure over the Muslim world. And then we will take a look at the Abbasid Caliphate, Islam's cultural peak, and the growth of Islam in Asia as well. So the Sunnis and the Shiites. The Sunnis and the Shiites divided over the issue of authority, over who should take over after Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad. For approximately, in the modern world, 80% of Muslims are Sunni, and the minority are the Shiites. It's approximately 20% Shiite. Majority of Shiites are here in Iran, although there are a few down here around Yemen and some in the Central Asia as well. Iran is the only majority Shiite country, though. That being said, there are a few Shiites. You'll find Shiites in most Muslim countries. You'll find a small community of Shiites in most Muslim countries. You can see that Islam has spread in terms of countries that are majority Muslim. Most of North Africa now is Muslim, all the way over into Indonesia. We talked about Indonesia and Bali, how that's Muslim. Large parts of Thailand, of Malaysia, large parts of India are also Muslim, spread quite far. So the Sunnis. Sunnis means the people of the Sunnah. And the Sunnah is the interpretation of the Hadith in the Quran and how it applies to people's everyday life. It's not in this way. Islam is not unlike Judaism, right? Because Judaism has a strong tradition of laws coming from their scripture, right? And from that came a series of commentaries, interpretations by various rabbis on how to take the law and apply it to people's lives. So Islam is no different. There's a lot of law and rules in the Quran, and the interpretation of these is called the Sunnah, right? So the Sunnis emphasize the authority of the Quran, the Hadith, and the Sunnah. They also believe that Muhammad did not appoint a successor, but he rather meant to leave the issue of succession up to the Muslim community, which is called the Ummah, right? So that Sunnis believe that the Prophet Muhammad purposefully left it up to the Muslim community to decide who would be in charge when he died. And we'll see the Shiites have a very different idea about that. Sunnis do have one large Muslim leader called the Caliph. He's the leader of worship. He's kind of the administrator of sacred law, and also the sacred law being Shariah, which we'll talk about. Sunnis also have a number of lay leaders called imams. Right, here's an imam right here. Every mosque and mosque is the place where Muslims go to worship. We'll look at more of those next week. But every mosque has one imam, and the imam is not exactly like a priest or a pastor. He's closer to a rabbi. He's a teacher. He reads the scripture to the Muslims when they go to mosque on Friday. Like the Jewish population, Muslim population goes to mosque to worship on Friday. And imams will give a short sermon, and they help settle disputes within the community, but they're appointed by the community itself, right? They don't have to go to school to be imams. They're appointed by the community itself, and usually a community will appoint whoever within their ranks is the most educated. Right, whoever's the most educated will be appointed the imam. So he's more, in a lot of ways, imam acts more as an elder. Only men can be imams, and we'll talk about that next week. That's kind of an issue within modern Islam. So Islamic law, Shariah. Sunni Muslims put a good deal of emphasis on Shariah. Right? Shariah is its law, codified law, which is to say it's all laid out in legal terms like you might find in a law school. And it's all based on the Quran and the Sunnah, right? The interpretations of the Quran, which the Sunnis are named for. It has rules that dictate to everything from daily life to social justice issues of how to deal with crimes, how to deal with it has rules of dietary law. Again, like the Jews, Muslims have a dietary law theirs is called halal. In a lot of ways it's similar to rules of kosher. It deals with cleanliness and things like that, and also the Shariah has some rules dealing with business. Has a lot of rules dealing with government administration in some cases, even though the Shariah is kind of codified law, there's still a lot of different interpretations of it. Right? People still interpret it very differently, and different countries, different majority Muslim countries, may use the Shariah to inform their own government. So Saudi Arabia is a good example. We'll look at this in the next lecture. Saudi Arabia is a good example of a country whose government and legal system is greatly influenced by the Shariah, greatly. Other countries like Turkey are a lot more secular. Turkey's a pretty secular country. And here's a picture of the Shariah here, right? Interpretations of it, of the Quran. So the Shariah does tend to be like more conservative. That's a big criticism of the Shariah. That's very conservative, that it limits the rights of a lot of people, including women. But it should be noted that the Shariah actually gave women more rights than women of the West had. Women of what Christian countries had until the 19th century. It gave women the right to inherit property, to choose to divorce their husbands if they want to run businesses of their own, and own property and other things that were not allowed in a lot of Christian nations for a long time. So it was actually quite progressive, really. So the other sect of Islam is the Shia, right? People who are of Shia Islam call themselves Shiites, okay? So it's Shia Islam, Shiite Muslim, if that makes sense. They are very much devoted to the memory of Muhammad and his close relatives. This picture down here is of something called alum, and it's just a picture of a hand you can see here, and the fingers represent the 5 people that Muslims, or the Shiite Muslims, really respect, including the Prophet Muhammad, his daughter Fatima, his beloved daughter Fatima, who is famous throughout the Muslim world for her intelligence and her purity and her character. And in fact, Fatima is one of the most common female names in the Muslim world. Her husband Ali, and their son Hussein. That's 4. There's one more. I think it was Muhammad's wife, Fatima's mother. So this is a symbol. This is a common symbol used for Shiite Muslims, right? It represents these 5 people. So the Shiites believe that Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, did in fact leave a successor. And there is a story within the Hadith in which Muhammad takes the hand of Ali, his son-in-law, and he tells the people around him that this is a man of great virtue and great intelligence, and that he should be respected. His authority should be respected, basically. And for Shiites, that was the Prophet naming Ali as his successor. The Shiites believe. Sunnis believe that Ali was a wonderful man, but that, the Prophet was just praising him and not naming him as a successor. Pardon? So the Shiite Muslims, this all goes back to the very beginning when the Prophet died and Ali took over, and then another man took over, and the Shiites believed that Hussein, their son, Fatima and Ali's son, should have been a successor in to the Muslim hierarchy, to the Muslim authority, right? The Shiites believe Hussein should have been the successor, and he wasn't. And a great battle broke out. There was a lot of fighting. There was a lot of bloodshed over this, and in the end, Hussein himself died. Hussein today is still highly regarded as a martyr for his religion. And lots of stories are told about him that on the battlefield at the time of his death, that he knew he was going to die, that he wasn't going to survive the battle, but he wouldn't leave. He fought anyway because out of a sense of justice. So Shiites have a holiday in which they remember Hussein and his father Ali, called Ashura. Right, and we'll take a look at that next week. It's a major holiday. Instead of caliphs, the Shiites have major leaders called imams, right? And so this is different than in the Sunni tradition, in which imams are local leaders who are chosen by the community. Imams in Shiite imams are the major leaders. They're the highest position of authority. And they believe in a succession of 7 or 12 imams, depends upon which tradition you're from. And this is a picture here this is a very common picture to be found in Iran and other Shiite places of Ali and Hussein, right? And after that, when bloodshed first took place, the Shiites and the Sunnis always had this great tension between them ever after, right? There are still a lot of places where Shiites and Sunnis are still don't get along very well and fight and whatnot. So those are the 2 major sects. And then there's another group of Muslims called Sufis. Sufis are mystics. They're Muslim mystics. And there are Shiite Sufis, there are Sunni Sufis, there are Sufis that maybe didn't even consider themselves part of either grouping, right? As you might have realized, like Judaism, Islam is a religion of a lot of rules, a lot of it can tend towards legalism, which is it can focus too much on those rules, on issues of hierarchy and things like that. And Sufism is kind of a response to that legality. And Sufis try to form, mystical bonds with God through devotion, through meditation, through asceticism, through any number of different practices. And indeed, the Sufi traditions are incredibly diverse around the world. They're incredibly diverse. Especially in times when there's been a lot of emphasis on law and rules in Islam, Sufis have really thrived. It's not unlike when we talked about Christian monks and nuns and Christian mysticism during medieval times. Medieval Europe, there was a lot of issue about authority, about the Pope's authority, about authority of priests, about rules and laws of being a good Christian. And in the midst of all of that debate, you had this group of people who kind of rise up, these Christian monks and nuns and mystics who say, no, it's not about these rules and laws. It's about gaining that connection with God. It's about having a genuine experience, direct contact with God. It's not about all the rules. And that's what the Sufis did for Islam. They came out and they said it's about more than just the rules. And they played a major role in the development of in the spread of Islam across the world. Sufis have also been very good at adapting to foreign cultures. Islam spread a lot through traders, merchants who were Muslim merchants who traded, spices and silks and things from Asia to Europe. But those people didn't always make the best representatives of the religion, right? They were businessmen, not men of religion. But where those merchants stopped and built towns or stayed in foreign countries to help develop their businesses, Sufis followed soon after. And a lot of times Sufis were very good at reaching out to local cultures, to local people. A good example is in Central Asia. Before, most of Central Asia was a part of China, and places that we call Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan now. All those Central Asian countries. Islam spread, but at the time, most of the people who were living in those areas, most of the Muslims there, were nomads, right? They're living the nomadic life, where they were traveling with their herds, they were living in tribes, and they didn't really have a lot of contact with one another. And one thing that the Sufis did when they started to spread to Central Asia is they started to build connections and contacts with other Muslim leaders and other Sufis and other tribes, so that they could become, as a people, they could become a little bit more united. That's one way the Sufis adapted to a foreign culture. Another good example is that in India, Muslims had been, Persian and Arabic Muslims had migrated to India for the sake of business and had been living there for several generations. And the Hindu people, the Indian people, were not really interested in converting. They were not really interested in Islam at all. You can imagine that Islam would stand in a great contrast to Hinduism, right? It would seem very strange to Hindus, this idea of strict monotheism. What happened was that once the Sufis moved into India, once the Sufis started spreading, it gave the Hindus a point of reference. What I mean is that the Hindus saw the Sufi teachers and the Sufi masters who were very philosophical, who were after times ascetics, and they went, oh, okay, they're like gurus. They're like yogis, right? It's just like, they're like Shaivites. We understand this, right? We understand, it was something that was easier for them to connect with. And there's a great tradition of Sufism in India for many centuries, and there's a lot of different Sufi sheikhs. A Sufi sheikh is, or a Sufi sheikh, as it's sometimes called, is a teacher, a philosopher of the Sufi background, very much like a guru, and they were respected both by Muslims and Hindus, and when they died, a lot of times the more famous ones had memorials built in their honor, and both Hindus and Muslims still visit those memorials to this day, right? I have a Hindu friend, Ash, who I've mentioned several times, and I was talking to her about this, and she said, oh yeah, she said there's one of it, she named one particular Sufi master, and she's like, when I'm in India, I a lot of times I'll go and I'll visit his memorial, I'll visit his grave, right? So it acted, the Sufis in India could help act as kind of bridge builders. How about that? Bridge builders. This particular picture on the side here, this is a picture from the Mughal Empire. The Mughal Empire was a Muslim kingdom in North India. There was a period of time, about 300 years, which Persians, I believe it was the Persians, came into India and they conquered the northern part of India and they set up an empire. The south became Hindu. South India became Hindu, North India became Muslim for a long time. And the Mughal kings were famous for respecting these Sufis. There was one famous king who was known to say that a Sufi master's authority, a Sufi sheikh's authority, was greater than his own authority as king, because the Sufi sheikh was speaking for God and was speaking for the religion, right? Whereas the king was just speaking for the world. So the kings really respected the Sufis, and the Sufis really thrived in that place. This particular painting is called "The King Honors the Sufi." Or the Sufi is honored over the kings, right? And what's going on here is that this is the Mughal king, right? And all of these different people have come to see him. And these are all kings in themselves. This is a European king. You can see he's a white guy. This is a Turkish king right here. This is looks like an Arabic king. All these different kings have come to visit the Mughal king. But the Mughal king is only interested in talking to this poor Sufi man, right? This poor man in dirty garments, who has nothing but his teachings in the form of this book, right? But the king is wise and he understands that he has more to offer than all of these other kings. So the Sufis have a very interesting tradition. I'm going to give you a couple ideas of what modern Sufis do. A lot of Sufism has died out in the modern world, but there are still a couple vestiges of Sufism. One is the whirling dervishes, which you might have heard of a whirling dervish before. You might have seen them and not known what they were. They're mostly found in Turkey today. A dervish is just basically a poor Sufi student, right? Someone who's studying Sufism and is kind of poor and doesn't have a lot. And they do this form of dance as a show of devotion. They spin in circles, right? And the spinning in a circle, it represents the motion of the universe, and the motion of the universe, kind of in Muslim minds, everything in the universe kind of revolves around God in a certain sense, right? And it also produces a sort of divine ecstasy. It produces a sort of trance in the Sufis, within which they can, their spirits can reach Allah. I have a video.
There are stories about the origin of the whirling dervishes, and one of the stories is Rumi was walking towards, just walking down, and he heard the call for prayer, and he was so overwhelmed, he was so almost in an ecstasy to hear the call for prayer that he started moving around, and he called it a divine ecstasy. And since then, his followers started making this whirling. It's creating an atmosphere to pray, and it's an offering. I think it's just a physical way of expressing this love for the divine, and that's how they kind of twirl. And in the whirling, it becomes a meditation. It's an ecstatic state, but over the years it's become an art form. They do not call it a performance. I would not call it a performance. It is a spiritual offering. This became a symbol of believing in beyond religion, beyond the rituals, beyond the fundamental beliefs of Islam. It continues to evolve, it continues to grow. But I want to just make a very clear distinction that everyone today will say Sufism, the term, is not a religion. It is a philosophy, a belief, and the commonalities, whether one is a Muslim, a Hindu, a Jew, or a Sikh, or Christian, the commonality is the looking for love, peace, harmony, of coming together in unison. as a voice.
Are submitting themselves to Allah, or to reach Allah, or to reach God. And I'll show you what I mean. This is Rumi right here. And Rumi was a Persian Sufi. He's a poet, and he's probably one of the most famous poets in world literature history. If you ever take a world literature class or a world poetry class, you're going to come across Rumi. He's really quite famous. And he was a Muslim, a Sufi, who wrote beautiful poetry about Allah and spoke of Allah with great love, right? This great desire for God and this great desire for a oneness or connection with God. And so he also part of his teachings were that he kind of saw all religions as pointing towards the same thing, right? One quote from one of his poems, it says, "The nation of love has a different religion of all religions. For lovers, God alone is their religion," right? So different nations have lots of different religions and things, but if you love God, if you're truly devoted to God, then God alone is your religion, and all the trappings of different religions are kind of fall away. And that kind of, it strikes a chord with people from all different traditions, people from all different religions. Really look to Rumi for a lot of inspiration. It was also very much a challenge for the establishment of Islam, which believes it is a restoration of the correct monotheistic path that was first set forth to Abraham, right, many centuries, millennia ago. Islam is the restoration of that path that got lost along the way. There will be some Muslims, more conservative or fundamentalist Muslims, who will look at Sufis like Rumi and say that he's not really a Muslim if he gives any credence to any other beliefs besides those of Islam. But for the most part, he's still highly read and studied by Muslims in most Muslim institutions. He's read as much as Shakespeare is read here in America and in Europe. Another important part of his teachings was this idea of development, that his spirit, that his soul was developing. He was growing, almost in this kind of evolutionary, sciencey kind of the way. And he was born and lived long before Darwin and long before those sorts of ideas became popular. That's kind of how he saw his striving towards God, was a slow development. And this poem right here is a really famous one. And it kind of expresses that idea. It says, "I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and rose to animal. I died as animal and I was man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? Yet more I shall die as man, to soar with angels blessed. But even from angelhood I must pass on. All except God doth perish. When I have sacrificed my angel soul, I shall become what no mind e'er conceived. Oh, let me not exist, for non-existence proclaims in organ tones, to him we shall return." So when he talks about dying here, he's not talking about a physical, literal dying. He's talking about transformation. He's talking about changing and growing in his life, So he's growing and he's developing and he's getting closer to God. And his goal, in his mind, the idea is to lose himself and find a sort of oneness in God, so that there's no differentiation, right? And if you think about it, the word Islam means surrender. Word Muslim means submit. So for Rumi, the idea is like he submits and he surrenders himself. He sacrifices and surrenders his very self, and gives himself over entirely to God, right? To obtain this sort of oneness. So that is a little bit about the Sufis. And as I say, there aren't as many Sufi masters anymore. A lot of the Sufi masters are still revered in India and other places, but a lot of places like Saudi Arabia and other places have kind of turned away from Sufi tradition in the direction of more, I guess, law-based, rule-based kinds of expression. More, I guess, I would say simple and kind of authentic expressions, as through the 5 pillars of Islam. How about that? But there's still some Sufis around. So we talked a little bit about how Islam spread through traders and through Sufis and people who were trying to convert. Initially, within 20 years of the Prophet's death, the Arab tribes who had converted to Islam came together. They formed they gained a political authority called the Umayyad, and the Umayyad spread and conquered and took much of North Africa here, as well as much of the Middle East. It spread. Islam spread both as spiritual and secular power. There's kind of a stereotype of Muslim invaders who force people to convert and slaughter innocent people, but actually most conversions actually came through trade and personal contact. Charismatic Sufis, an example, particular Muslim. There were quite a few Muslim leaders who were upheld as, very good men, perfect examples of men trying to follow the example of the Prophet, and it gained a lot of attention in especially parts of the world, like some parts of the Middle East and North Africa, where a lot of corruption had spread and political power was synonymous with sin and not caring about the people you take care of. So that's how Islam really spread for the most part. And it should be noted that the Umayyad leaders took a certain part of the Quran very seriously, where it says that no one can be coerced into conversion to Islam. Conversion to Islam must be a choice. And so they took that very seriously. And for the most part, Christians and Jews and other religious groups were allowed to live peacefully under Muslim rule. The caliphate, which is the religious authority and political authority, was taken over by the Abbasid dynasty in 750. So it went from the Umayyads to the Abbasid. And they moved the capital from Damascus to Baghdad. So, going back here. Damascus was the center, or was the capital of the Umayyads. And the Abbasids moved it back to Baghdad, which is in modern-day Iraq, modern-day Arabia. Under the Abbasids, there was this great period of intellectual and artistic activity and development. Islam absorbed, transmitted, and expanded upon other traditions from other cultures, such as Persian art and poetry. It wasn't uncommon for the leaders, the Abbasid leaders and kings, to invite artists and intellectuals, scientists, all sorts of people from other religions and other cultures to their capital to learn from them. There was a great university system at the time. And down here we have a picture. These are Muslim scientists studying astronomy. These are ancient astronomical tools, right? For studying the stars. The Muslim scientists really helped save a lot of Greek learning on science and medicine that the Christian empires, the Christian kingdoms, had kind of let deteriorate and kind of forgotten. There was a period of time when, you might remember from our section on Christianity, that Christendom had divided into, Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. The Eastern Orthodoxy side of things, the political systems were breaking down, right? That's why the Umayyads were able to take over so easily, because the political systems had the kingships had broken down. And no one was preserving any of the ancient Greek literature on the sciences. The ancient Greeks were probably the most important some of the most important developers of the sciences in human history, right? There's certain groups that stand out in science history. The ancient Greeks, the ancient Hindus, actually, ancient Indians, and the Muslims, because the Muslims helped save the remaining Greek literature and science and medicine. They are very well known as well for their, the Muslims are very well known as well for their understanding of medicine. And math as well. You might not know this, but the number system that we use, 1, 2, 3, 4, the way we write it is actually, those are actually Arabic numerals. That's the way the Arabs wrote numbers. That's where we get our math from. That's where we get our algebra from. It's where we get a good number of different mathematical systems from. It's from the medieval Arabs. Also, they were, the Abbasid Empire was known for its art. You can see here intellectuals and artists sitting around in a salon talking. There's someone playing music, you know, they're discussing great ideas, they're smoking their hookahs, they're having a good time. And then here's Rumi as well, right, who's another great example of religious art that came from Persia. So this was just a really kind of a golden age for intellectualism in that part of the world in that time period. Islam also moved eastward through Central Asia into India, which we talked about, all the way down to Malaysia, China, Indonesia, and beyond. The Mongols, the famous hoarders and famous nomads that conquered most of Asia, also converted to Islam. Turks converted to Islam. A lot of that happened through the Silk Road. As early as the time of ancient Rome, as early as the time of 100 CE or 100 AD, there was a desire in the West, in Europe, for goods from the East, from places like China and India. There's a desire to import things like Chinese silk and Chinese teas and Indian spices and all sorts of different things. And so from that, that desire grew the Silk Road, which was a merchant route that went all the way from Rome all the way up into Beijing, China. I mean, it wasn't Beijing, it was wherever the capital of China was at the time, right? Right in the middle of all of that was the Muslim nations, Persia, Arabia, Turkey. And so they benefited greatly from that trade. And the Silk Route, as it was known, was mostly dominated by Muslims. So Muslims spread as far as Beijing. This is actually a Muslim temple, or Muslim mosque, a Chinese Muslim mosque in Xi'an, which is a city in China. You can see it's very Chinese looking, but it's a mosque. Spread through, these are pictures of Mongols who had converted to Islam. It's Indians, of course, the Mughal Empire, all the way down into Indonesia. The main way that Islam spread as far as it did was through trade, and a lot of that had to do with the Silk Road. But there were some conquerors as well. The Mughals were an empire that was built on conquest. But in places like Asia, Indonesia, things like that, it was through trade. So Islam has always kind of had this complicated relationship to the West, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the next lecture. But in the late Middle Ages, we remember that the Christian kings formed a crusade against the Holy Lands, as they called them, the area of Palestine and whatnot, and Byzantine and places that used to belong to Christians in the Middle East, and tried to reclaim them. Jerusalem had become a holy city to Muslims as well, because Jerusalem obviously has a great connection to the prophets and the stories of Abraham of Moses and other people that Muslims revere as much as Christians, as much as Jews do. So that led to a good number of years of warfare, right? The Crusades were long and bloody. And that warfare also led to a lot of ignorance and misunderstanding and stereotyping of the enemy. There's a picture here of the Christian Crusaders fighting against the Muslims. Christians in medieval Europe denounced Islam. They denounced Muhammad. They said that Muhammad was an idolater, that he worshipped idols. They said that Muslims themselves were practiced idolatry because they worshipped Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, which they didn't, of course. Muslims do not worship the Prophet Muhammad. They use him as an example. And so they called Islam a polytheistic faith. Muslims, on the other hand, looked at Christianity and looked at the idea of the Holy Trinity of God in three persons and said, no, that's polytheism. The Christians believe in three gods and not one, even though the Christians would say, no, we don't. We only believe in one God, God who has three forms. These characterizations persisted in the West until the present. There was just a good deal of ignorance on both sides. To this day, we'll talk about this next week, both Christians and Muslims still don't understand each other very well, and that causes a lot of problems. Another issue there was between Christians and Muslims was that each considered themselves to be the ultimate religion, right? Christians believed that people must be converted to Christianity to be saved, from their sins, and must be saved by faith. And Islam thinks the same thing about itself, that Islam is the final monotheistic religion. It's the ultimate monotheistic religion, and that through Islam one can be saved. So there's clearly a tension there, right? There's going to be a tension. I've known plenty of Muslims myself, and I've never felt a tension with them, right? We've always respected one another. We could see how historically it would create issues if Muslims are trying to convert Christians and Christians are trying to convert Muslims. So that's a brief history of the development of the Muslim empire. The discussion for part 2 is, what kind of contributions did Islam make to world culture in its history, right? The history that we've covered today. What kinds of contributions? Artistic contributions, religious, you could even go into business contributions or political contributions, anything at all did Islam make to world culture and its history. Okay? Email me with any questions that you have. If Muslims are trying to convert Christians and Christians are trying to convert Muslims. So that's a brief history of the development of the Muslim empire. The discussion for part 2 is, what kind of contributions did Islam make to world culture in its history, right? The history that we've covered today. What kinds of contributions? Artistic contributions, religious, you could even go into business contributions or political contributions, anything at all did Islam make to world culture and its history. Okay? Email me with any questions that you have.